What slavery means? Slavery, condition in which individuals are owned by others who control where they live and at what they work. Who are domestic workers? Domestic workers comprise a significant part of the global workforce in informal employment and are among the most vulnerable groups of workers. They work for private households, often without clear terms of employment, unregistered in any book, and excluded from the scope of labor legislation. At the moment, there are more than 60 million domestic workers in the world. Even though a substantial number of men work in this sector, it remains a highly feminist sector. 80% of all domestic workers are women. Their work many include tasks such as cleaning the house, cooking, washing and ironing clothes, taking care of children or elderly or sick members of family, gardening, guarding the house, driving for the family, and even taking care of household pets. A domestic worker may work on full-time or part-time basis, may be employed by a single household or be multiple employers, may be residing in the household of the employer, or may be living in his own residence. A domestic worker may be working in a country of which she or he is not a national, thus referred to as immigration domestic worker. What is a problem? At present, domestic workers often face very low wages, excessively long hours, have no guaranteed weekly day of rest, and at times are vulnerable to physical, mental and sexual abuse. Exploitation of domestic workers can partly be attributed to gaps in national labor and employment legislation, and often reflects discrimination along the lines of sex, race and caste.
Why is it a concern? Women make up half of today's migrants all around the world. Many of these women move to neighboring countries which have better paychecks in order to financially support their families. Most of these migrant domestic workers are female, but it includes some number of males as well. Migrant domestic workers offer essential services to the countries where they go, contributing to the wealth of aging societies and the sustainability of these countries' welfare and employment systems. Despite coming to a more developed country than they used to live in, the migrant domestic workers can experience bad treatment by their employers. Their vulnerabilities are often caused by insecure recruitment process, like including passport and contract substitution, as well as charges of high fees, the absence of guide program, and protection mechanisms. The social isolation and discrimination, lack of good and specific information on terms and conditions of employment, absence of labor law coverage and or enforcement in the country of destination, and a restriction on freedom of movement. The horrible conditions these foreign domestic workers live in may lead to many problems such as separation from their families and home, abusive employers leading to violence towards the workers, and sexual abuse. Depression, anger and frustration can occur at the workers. Foreign domestic workers are at the risk of mental issues. Except for the mental issues, they can experience health issues as they are exposed to lack of sleep, toxic substances, and violence. They get very low wages despite working for many hours each day a week, have no rest from the work, and many of these migrant domestic workers commit suicide because of the horrible conditions that they are put into. There are about 67 million migrant domestic workers all around the world. About 73.4% of these workers are female and 26.6% are male. The biggest percentage of these migrant domestic workers are in Arab states with 27.4%. Southeastern Asia and the Pacific make up to 19.4%. Northern, Southern and Western Europe makes up to 19.2%. Migrant domestic workers move to neighboring countries from the LEDCs to MEDCs, or at least countries with higher payments, so they can support their families. Great examples are from Bolivia and Paraguay to Argentina, or from Nicaragua and El Salvador to Costa Rica, or from Indonesia to Singapore. Death of shipyard worker in Poland, which took place in the city of Gdynia. The reason why this case is different from others is because the workers came from North Korea. Polish officials have taken an investigation of this company and found that the company employed up to 800 slave laborers in Polish shipbuilding and construction sector. It is even claimed that North Korean workers' salaries are paid to the managers and then sent to Pyongyang to the North Korean regime. North Korea earns at least 1.6 billion pounds per year from the laborers that are working overseas. These money are spent on the development of weapons for North Korean regime. Some of these laborers were interviewed and said that they live in terrible conditions. North Korean laborers employed in Poland are forced to work 12 hours a day for 6 days a week, with little amount of rest, food and water. Because of the complicated network of North Korean laborers working in Poland, it's hard for the Polish and EU authorities to find the laborers and put a stop to this abuse.
Talked about who domestic workers are and what they have to do with slavery. Now we'll discuss the outrageous and inhumane treatment of these vulnerable workers. When these migrant workers enter a country, their passports are forcefully taken away, and workers are pressured into forced labor. The working conditions are far away from ideal, and workers experience atrocious behavior from employers as well as other employees. This behavior includes physical violence such as punching, kicking, or being slapped, but it can reach implicable behavior of sexual abuse. Psychological ill-treatment such as name-calling cannot be forgotten. These are the daily lives of the workers. Consequently, this job brings no benefits into the lives of the workers whatsoever. Instead, they are deprived of food and rest and also face wage exploitation. To conclude, many workers get caught in trafficking and sold into other private businesses. Luckily, this is now rarely ever the case. At the end of the day, domestic workers aren't even treated as people and are without a doubt deprived of their rights. To begin, there are around 67 million domestic workers worldwide, not including child domestic workers. This number is steadily increasing in developed and developing countries. It's increasing due to more immigrant workers leaving to go to new countries and getting caught in atrocious jobs. There are human rights being imposed specifically for these workers, yet none seem to be very effective, and the ill-treating of these workers continues. It is very difficult because domestic workers work in small non-governmental companies. This means that the government has very little control over them. Sadly, these workers are willing to tolerate the living conditions and other things just so they earn money. As mentioned, they are also not allowed to leave since passports get taken away. Today, domestic workers can be found almost anywhere in the world, and the amount of them will likely reach appalling numbers. Of the Asian countries, Singapore is the second to have the largest number of documented foreign domestic workers. The domestic workforce in Singapore consists of roughly 17% of the total workforce in the country. Of this 17%, 56 are from Philippines and 32 are from Indonesia. In the country, workers are given no guarantee for a minimum wage, and their average monthly income reaches around $381, along with the net income, which is up to $158. More than a third of the workers employed pay for necessities such as food and medication themselves. 1/3 of the workers also find themselves living in unhygienic conditions. They work the whole week with a Saturday off, but on Sunday they have to get up and go work. 1/4 of domestic workers in Singapore are victims of violence, both psychological, like name-calling, but also physical. According to a survey in Singapore, 90% of workers are pressured into working excessive hours, of which 84% work more than 12 hours and 41% of them work on their rest days. The worst job for workers in Singapore are working as maids. 60% of maids, predominantly Filipino and Indonesians, and are exploited by employers. That is more than about 140,000 maids in Singapore alone.
Those domestic workers migrate to the rich oil countries on the Arabian Peninsula, thinking that their life conditions will be improved. But actually, it turns out to be their worst nightmares. Many Middle Eastern countries, such as Qatar and Kuwait, have a system called the kafala system, and it basically means sponsorship. It is made so that the employers can have control over the employees, who work in construction sites, private households, and many other domestic sectors. This system has created easy opportunities for the employers to exploit the workers. Those innocent workers face many types of abuse, such as forced labor, beating, burning with hot water, sexual harassment, rape, and many others. In Indonesia, many workers migrate to the Gulf states. However, many of them get treated badly. In fact, there has been a case where 2 Indonesian maids have been executed in Saudi Arabia. Therefore, Indonesia banned her citizens to work as domestic workers in 21 countries. These countries included Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Egypt. On the other hand, there are countries who are trying to make the living conditions better for those workers. Bahrain, for example, is a Middle Eastern country. They completely abolished the kafala system and introduced a new law that doesn't require workers to have a sponsorship. It allows them to have free access to free visas and allows the workers to work in different types of jobs.
Conclude foreign domestic workers are a growing problem all over the world. They are people who are looked down on, mistreated and malnourished. As we have talked about, foreign domestic workers come from a variety of different countries and are forced to work in many more.
The United Nations have tried many times to combat this practice by inputting laws. They have implemented further human rights, and human rights also specifically for women, and further encourage governments to do what is best for their citizens, while regarding domestic workers mainly.
The Domestic Workers Alliance is an agency that prevents labor violations and ensures the protection of the law. Even if laws and resolutions like these imposed ill treatment is continuing. Despite that, the number of workers are also increasing rapidly, making this a worldwide current problem.
This practice won't stop until somebody steps up. We believe, due to how current it is, that it is vital for more work-concentrated students to understand one of the biggest problems. We are the voices of our century. We are the future of the world, and that's why our actions and opinion matter.